if the rest of you are getting it as well. No? It's me? No. Okay, perfect. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our esteemed guest. Everybody, if you could stay on mute until you ask questions or participate in the discussion so that we don't hear all the background noise. And also, if you could please ask your questions in the chat. If questions come up, don't just forget about them. Just put them in the chat so that then we have a record of the questions. And if we don't get to all of them, we can still share them with Dr. Ali and with the rest of the group. So hopefully we can get back to it. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, who serves as the Vice President of the Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization for the National Wildlife Federation. He is also the founder of Revitalization Strategies, and I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that very well, it's my accent, Revitalization Strategies, a business focused on moving our most vulnerable communities from surviving to thriving. Before joining the National Wildlife Federation, and there's a lot that he has done in his life, so this is just one paragraph of his life, which is very, very small. But Dr. Ali was the Senior Vice President for the Hip Hop Caucus, connecting hip hop communities to the civic process to build power and create positive change. He also worked for 24 years at the US Environmental Protection Agency. He began on his social justice work at the age of 16, and later became the founding member of the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice, or OEJ. Dr. Ali uses a holistic approach for revitalizing vulnerable communities and has worked with more than 500 domestic and international communities to secure environmental, health, and economic justice. And we're very, very fortunate to have him here today because he's speaking internationally, nationally, everywhere. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say to us. Welcome.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Kathy, for that land acknowledgement. So critically important. I'd just like to call out that I am currently on the Mattaponi in the Pamunkey land, and I'm thankful for them protecting for millennia these spaces and places, and the lessons that they shared that I hope that one day everyone will embrace. The first principle of environmental justice is honoring Mother Earth. Imagine if that was something that was a foundational element of everything that we did in the design of policy and how policy played out, and how in our own personal lives that we lived that we truly honored Mother Earth. And many of us come from backgrounds and cultures that actually try to do that. And then we have others who we continue to pray for that they evolve into that positioning, if you will. It's an honor to be here with everyone this evening. And again, thank you to the North Carolina National Wildlife Federation for making this happen. It's good to see some folks on the screen. I can't see everyone. I did see my good friend, John Robbins. We sat on the board together, and a number of other folks. And you know, it's interesting as we have this journey tonight. I want to talk a little bit about humanity. I want to talk a little bit about policy. And I also want to talk about a pathway forward, because sometimes we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes the horizon seems too far away, too tough to get to. And that has to be, you know, an important part of the work that we do. And it has to also be a part of the hope and inspiration that is a part of our journey together. But we also have to honor the fact that we've made some mistakes in the past. And because of those mistakes, we don't have to get anchored in them, but we do have to understand how they have played such a critical role in the place that we find ourselves in this moment. And I'll do my best. I was raised in a family of ministers, so I'm going to do my best to be brief and to be precise, if you will. You know, it's interesting that on this Indigenous Peoples Day, that we have to also call out the fact that policy and the actions of men were a part of 100 million Indigenous brothers and sisters not being around, right? We know the genocide that happened. We also know that we operated from this 18th and 19th century paradigm where we felt that we could go and take land from people who had been living in harmony there for millennia, as was shared earlier in the land acknowledgement and in some of the other words that were being shared, that we stripped people from their traditional foods for those who work on food justice issues. That we, unfortunately, also tried to strip culture away. And we know how big culture is now a part of conversations across our country. And in taking that culture away, we tried to assimilate folks into a process that others thought that they should be following. And we didn't stop with our indigenous brothers and sisters. We brought African slaves to this country. And we gave them some of the most dangerous jobs to do. So for those of you who call out jobs injustice, we have to also realize what happened in that space and took away, once again, language, took away culture, took away people's traditional foods as a part of the process. With our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, we all know that our infrastructure that exists inside of our country, especially our railroads, was built by the contributions of Chinese Americans. And again, given some of the most dangerous jobs to do. And again, there were cultural sort of impacts that were happening in that space. All of these things were wrapped up in, and I want y'all to follow me on this because we learn from the past so that we can strengthen the positioning in the present and the future. Because of policy. Policy literally said that folks could do these types of things. And that's why we have to be so critically focused on how we make real positive change happen, who has a voice in that process, who has power in that process, and how do we make sure that there is truly equality, that there is justice when we're talking about that. And you know, it's interesting as we go through the ebbs and flow of history, we see how when people's voices, their sets of experiences, their energy and innovation is not honored, how it literally is actually a drag on our country. And some people will say, well, what do you mean, Mustafa? You know, there was trillions of dollars of wealth that was created and, you know, we built this and built that, but how much better could we have been if we didn't make those mistakes of the past? How much further would we be down the line toward truly embracing humanity if we had not done these egregious behaviors? And how has that played out in today's moment? Well, I know most of the folks who are on the line, you know, some folks come from civil rights background. Some folks come from a conservation background. Some folks come from environmental background. Some of the newer folks come from a climate background. So I like to anchor things. This is the paradigm that I've worked for years. And it goes like this. If Mrs. Johnson or Mrs. Ramirez doesn't get it, then why are we doing it? I want y'all to think about that because lots of times things are being created without everyday folks actually asking for it, without it actually benefiting everyday folks. Y'all should know I was raised in Appalachia and Michigan. So, you know, I keep things simple and to the point. And we can have a deeper conversation in the questions if we want to get wonky. If anybody's feeling good about that, we can have conversations about parts per million and parts per billion of chemicals and how it plays out on impacts on people's bodies. But I like to anchor folks in the reality of what's going on right now in this moment and how it ties into many of the issues that we care about. In our country, some would label as the greatest country on the planet, depending on how you analyze that. We have 100,000 people who are dying prematurely from air pollution every year. I want y'all to think about that. 100,000 people. That's more people who are dying from air pollution than are dying from gun violence. And we all know how important gun violence issues are for us to be focused on and getting it right. There's more people who are dying from air pollution than are dying from car crashes. Everybody do me a favor, because I can see some of y'all. Everybody do me a favor and take a deep breath in. Just hold on to it for a second. I'm not going to have anybody passing out, and let it go. You see, that is a very simplistic action. It is an autonomic response. It's something that we do time and time and time and time again each and every day. But sometimes we fail to realize how important it is to actually be able to do that. You know, when you're working on environmental injustice or environmental racism issues, you understand the value of being able to actually take a breath of clean and fresh air and how difficult that is for far too many communities across our country. For African-American communities, Latinx communities, indigenous communities, lower wealth white communities, Asian communities. It's amazing how many places across our country that people cannot take that breath of air. And it's also amazing that the mistakes that we've made where we know that disproportionately it is communities of color, lower wealth white communities, and indigenous folks who are ones who are bearing the burden of the toxic facilities that are located in their communities. We know disproportionately where they are. And we also know some of the outcomes that come out of that. Liver and kidney disease. How many folks, by a show of hands, know somebody who has liver or kidney disease? Just raise your hand and keep your hand up. How many folks know somebody who has cancer? How many folks know someone who has breathing difficulties, asthma, or other types of lung diseases? So I can't see everyone on the screen, but I can see a lot of folks, and almost every person has their hand raised right now. That's the seriousness of what's going on. We have 24 million people in our country who are suffering from asthma, 7 million kids. And disproportionately, it's African-American and Latinx folks who are the ones who are going to the emergency rooms and the ones who are losing their lives prematurely. And it's because of what folks are breathing. Now, some folks might say, well, Mustafa, you know, what I care about is our natural parks, our special spaces, right? That so many folks have been trying to protect. Or I care about wildlife. That's my thing. And I don't necessarily see the intersection between racial justice issues and systemic racism and what's going on in the conservation space. So let's sort of navigate that here real quickly. So that same pollution that is making Black and brown people and lower wealth white communities sick is that same pollution that now has 90% of our national parks dealing with significant air pollution. Think about that for a second. And of course, that's the same pollution that is also warming up our oceans, that is warming up our atmosphere, that is causing the climate crisis that we find ourselves in with, you know, the heat waves and the hurricanes and the wildfires and all these other types of things that we currently see going on that we have to get our arms around. And is also a part of driving some of the losses that we're seeing in dealing with biodiversity issues. So whether we care about wildlife, if we care about our natural spaces, or hopefully our humanity is also saying that we have to also care about our brothers and sisters, for those who follow either the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or any of our other religious books, they all tell us that we have a responsibility for looking out for each other. So it is all literally connected. And I just want to take y'all real quickly on a few places around the country. Most folks who know me know I've worked in almost 1,000 communities now, both in our country and outside. And you know, it's amazing some of the things that you'll see. And sometimes you take these people from Washington, D.C. to some of these locations and they'll say, Mustafa, I had no idea. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, you're a senator, you're a congressman, you work at the White House. How is it that you don't know that these types of things are going on? But then you also have to take a step back and you have to say to yourself, well, in this moment, you have a responsibility to sort of educate folks and then see what they do with that information, if that makes sense to everyone. So you've got places like the Manchester community in Houston, Texas. Again, I can only see a few folks, but how many folks been to Houston? Just raise your hand. Okay, we got a few folks that have been to Houston. So most folks have been to Houston, but most folks ain't spent no time at the Ship Channel, right? And they're at the Ship Channel, the hardworking Latinx community. And when you go to these folks' homes, and if you are in their backyards or in their front yards, you can reach your hand out. Everybody just reach your hand out as far as your arm will go. Doesn't matter which one. You literally, if you are in these folks' yards, you can touch the piping that exists in these facilities. Now, I just have to ask y'all, because I know everybody on here are good folks. You know, how is it that we could possibly have folks living in that type of a situation? There's the Cesar Chavez High School that's there. I was an athlete, you know, in high school and college. I ran track. And there's this iconic photo that has the school that's there. And then there's a bunch of flaring and all these facilities that are in the background. And I was wondering to myself, I said, how in the world could you possibly expect kids to learn? We know how difficult it can be. There's so many distractions. But imagine if you are literally living in this situation. And I want to share this with y'all. I don't know how many folks got an old car. And I think there's nothing wrong with having an old car. I'm talking about a car that you can literally roll the windows down. That's when you know you either got an old car or a classic car. And I see some people smiling. You know, when you go to this community and you roll your windows down, you literally feel like you're breathing in gasoline fumes. Now, I want you to imagine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you're living in this type of a situation. And that's why policy is so critically important, because we cannot possibly allow people to live in these situations. And if we're going to have real talk, and y'all shouldn't have invited me if you didn't want real talk, we also have to understand how our transportation policies have played out. We know that there has been biases, there's been racism infused into transportation policies, because we had roads that literally broke up communities, that dropped off wealth into certain communities and dropped off pollution into other communities. In our housing, we also know that it existed inside of housing. And I see folks nodding their head because you may have experienced it, where affordable housing, lower income housing was placed in floodplains, was placed in the least desirable situations. I call them sacrifice zones, because we have sacrifice zones in our country and we have sacrifice people in our country, and we have the opportunity to change that dynamic. So when you see a community like the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, or the 48217 in Detroit, when kids get up and look out the window and instead of seeing trees that so many of us have been able to embrace and to work on those issues and understand the benefits of that, they see facilities instead of trees. Or when you go to places like Cancer Alley in Louisiana, there between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, founded by freed slaves, a lot like Princeville in North Carolina. Yes, y'all, I know North Carolina, so we'll get into that. But there, people, for as far as the eye can see, there are nothing but facilities, and not small facilities either. And that, once again, is why hopefully in 2021, we will have folks who will embrace the fact that we need a strong environmental protection agency, that we need to make sure that we have the right types of laws, or we're taking a look at our laws and helping to strengthen them so more people are protected. And when we don't do that, for folks who live in communities, you know, like there in Cancer Alley, we're literally telling them that their lives don't matter, that it's okay for these types of situations to go on. Or you can go back up the road. I told y'all I'm from Appalachia. You can look at places like Institute, West Virginia, where in the summertime, my friends, I used to visit my friends there in the summertime, and emissions would get trapped. We all know, we call mountains there in West Virginia. They're really big, giant hills, but you know, that's all right. We're going to say mountains. And emissions get trapped. And my friends' fathers were getting cancers at a very young age, late 30s, early 40s, because of the emissions that they were breathing in. We have the ability to change that dynamic, because at the same time that people are getting sick, we are losing so many other things that are in our natural systems. And we're losing a part of ourselves when we allow people to be sacrificed for profits over people. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a balance between a strong economy and also making sure that we have strong environmental protection, making sure that we are protecting our natural spaces. There can be a balance. People will use that false narrative. They used it, you know, in so many ways. I remember stories from some of my mentors talking to me about when folks first started taking taking lead out of gasoline, and how they said it would crash the economy. And then year after year after year, the economy grew. And at the same time, we had, you know, better and better environmental protections that were going on. So we don't have to deal with that false paradigm. What we do have to do is figure out, how do we bring all these pieces together to make real change happen? And why, Mustafa, do we need to do that? So let's have some more real talk. In our country right now, we got 80 million people who are uninsured and underinsured. And I'm sure everybody knows somebody who has had to deal with these significant medical bills that come. And hopefully folks at least had some insurance. And imagine if you don't have any. So that's one of the reasons, because we also know, whether we are talking about from environmental impacts or we are talking about impacts happening from climate change, that if you don't have insurance, you're in a serious set of issues. We also know we got 140 million people who are poor or lower wealth in our country. And that's another reason we got to be focused on this new clean economy, that hopefully we can get focused and deeply entrenched enough that we can lift everyone up so they can help to make real change happen. Let me ask y'all by a show of hands, how many folks in the last 24 hours have had a drink of water or a beverage? Let me see how many people. Let me see. It looked like almost everybody had something to drink. We ain't gonna say what, but folks had something to drink. You know, it's amazing how, you know, we get these really basic protections in place, the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, right? And then because we've got it in place, sometimes folks think, well, that's enough. You know, that's enough. We don't have to worry too much about that. And the interesting thing is, you know, in our country, most folks don't know this, we got 2.2 million folks who don't even have access, right, to drinking water or sewage, which we know is serious. We got 170,000 violations that are happening around our safe drinking water stuff. And we got 20 million folks in our country every year who have to deal with gastrointestinal problems because of the things that they're being exposed to through certain water systems. And I know many of you have also worked on PFOA and PFAS issues and a number of these other really critical issues that we've got to get our minds around. And I just want to share this with you also, because I know most folks remember the Flint water crisis. And you remember all those babies who unfortunately were poisoned from lead. And you all know, you know, the neurological disorders that come out of that, the hyperactivity, ADHD, all these various things that are a part of those exposures. And we got 1,000 locations across our country that have higher levels of lead in their water than Flint does. I want y'all to think about that for a second. And that's why we got to have these protections that are in place and make sure that these babies, our generation and next generation and the generation following that, you know, don't have to deal with these types of situations. And here's the beauty of the moment that we find ourselves in, is that even though we know we got 25 million folks who are living in food deserts or food insecure issues, we got 24 million folks who are living in medically underserved areas. You know, we got folks who are dealing with, because of these real significant challenges that they're facing, both from COVID-19 and from climate change, these mental health impacts that are happening, that we can actually make real change happen based upon the things that we decide to move forward on. And the beauty of the moment is that we also get a chance to build a new economy. You know, it's interesting. My grandfather was a coal miner, and my dad worked in a plant. And the coal mines began to shrink and shut down, and folks didn't want to bring new opportunities in. And as the plants began to close down, you know, they still didn't want to bring enough new opportunities in. Now we got a chance to create millions of new jobs. And that's going to come through this new climate economy. And it's not just wind and solar and thermal and tidal and a number of the other opportunities. It's all this new technology that's going to happen. And we get a chance to be a part of that, to actually make change happen. And one of the other reasons that we've got to really get focused and engaged, of course, is because of COVID-19 and this new set of dynamics that we find ourselves in. And all the work that you've done and many others in trying to raise the alarm about this pollution that has been impacting folks. And now we know if you have a long-term chronic medical condition, that it makes you more vulnerable to COVID-19. So all the things we've been doing has been trying to get people to pay attention. And thankfully, now we have a number of young people who are getting engaged, who are pushing, and who are helping to make real change happen. We have elders who are, you know, utilizing the wisdom of being around and seeing a number of things all coming together to make change happen. And I'm just going to leave y'all with this, because I know we're running short on time. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King once said that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. I want y'all to think about that. You know, in relationship to COVID-19, we all find ourselves in this same boat. You know, in relationship to the impacts that are happening from climate change, we find ourselves in these same boats together. In relationship to systemic racism, we also find ourselves in the same boat, even if we're not all being impacted the same. It is having an impact on our country. And we get the opportunity to now fix that. Now, I'm very clear, and if Dr. King was here, you know, I would respectfully also say that all the boats are not the same. There's some boats got some holes in them. Some boats ain't got some oars, you know, but coming together, we can bring all these boats together and then also make sure that we are helping everyone to be able to have the strength and the power that's necessary for us to actually make change. So with that being said, I want to thank y'all for a couple of minutes of your time, and I'm looking forward to us unpacking many of the questions that folks have. I'm Mustafa Santiago Ali. Thank y'all for a couple of minutes of your time.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you so much. We have some questions that were sent in ahead of time, and I would like you to meet the people that are asking those questions. Hopefully they can share with us what they're thinking about. And I would like to start with Bishop Clarence Laney, who is the pastor of Monument of Faith Church in Durham. What is your question?
Thank you, Dr. Ali, for your presentation and for challenging us. My question, you mentioned policies at the beginning of your conversation. What can African-American communities do to affect policies that impact our communities?
Vote in historic numbers, all the way up and down the ticket, not just for the president, all the way down to the city council and all the positions that are a part of that. All of us also, you know, have to make sure that we're taking advantage of the census. When you are not being counted, then those resources are going to go to other locations. Mobilize and educate, whether inside of our churches or our mosques or our synagogues or wherever your house of worship is, or if it's not a house of worship, also utilizing our civic organizations to make sure that we are helping people to understand how critically important policy is, but also understanding that policy is tied to your vote. And that your vote also determines, I'm gonna give y'all some real talk, because we don't pay enough attention to this, that it also determines the judges and also the police chiefs and all these other folks that play a role in our communities. And we have to be holding everyone accountable and make sure that it is a positive set of relationships. But that means that we have to let folks know that we have power, and we're not just going to give our power away, and it's going to be translated into change. And the other part of that is also that we have to create economic wealth and capacity inside of our communities. And that means, once again, that we have to focus all these various skills and policies that make sure that we're not, you know, that we're not forgotten. And I mean, I can go into over the years how I have seen literally trillions of dollars move. And how when it came to certain communities, the percentage was minuscule at best. And sometimes that's because there was no real accountability built into the process. And then that goes back to voting. And of course, that goes back to policy. And of course, your policy is driven by who you put into office. So I never tell anybody who to vote for, but I do say vote for somebody who cares about your community and is willing to stand up and to also be okay with being held accountable. Because I don't care if you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat. There has to be accountability in the process. And if you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you find out there's a reason you can't do it, come back to the people and explain why you're not able to do that and how you're going to rectify that to continue to make sure that that progress is happening. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Mohammadou Niang, who is the Executive Director of the Musliman for the Environment in Raleigh.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Thank you for a great event and for the organizers as well. Kathy Kaufman with Orange Chatham Creation Care, and Lynn Lyle, and you also, Maria, with North Carolina Wildlife. My question, I have a couple of questions. Hopefully I'm glad just to be able to get one in here, is that with so many protests, as we've seen in demonstrations all across the country, and most of them have been by peaceful, by law-abiding citizens in the pursuit of social justice, and especially following, obviously, the death of George Floyd and Jacob Blake and others, how could the masses be motivated consistently in the long run, and use this emotional energy to widen protest for not just for social justice, which is important, but also for environmental justice? You know, as you mentioned, Flint, Michigan, and other indigenous communities that are left behind, right? You don't see a cry from the nation, you know, when it comes to these other types of very serious situations. You know, obviously a brutal death of George Floyd is a bit different, and we're going to get emotional. But I'd like to see just consistent demonstrations in the long run. And how do you see that? How can we get that moving?
Well, I think it's already happening, to be quite honest with you, because, you know, a number of the folks who have been a part of, you know, the protests and bringing attention to the injustices have also began to build into their platforms many of the issues that we've talked about today. So they're building environmental justice, you know, into their platforms. They're building into, of course, you know, the changes that need to happen with the police. They're also understanding the power that exists inside their vote. And this is really critically important, because there are those folks who felt disenfranchised to vote because they didn't think that change could actually happen. And people have to help brothers and sisters, you know, of all hues to understand that, you know, voting one time does not make change happen. There has to be actually a systemic set of actions that continue to move that forward. And just for those who are like, well, why are people protesting? You know, I hear that occasionally, not too often. But when folks say that, it takes me back to the fact that, you know, folks who are involved with the Boston Tea Party and the founding of our country, they were protesters. You know, England said that they were rabble rousers and rioters and all these other types of things. So it was good enough for them, right? In the founding of our country. And as we move forward, you know, women got tired of people telling them what to do and that they couldn't vote and all these other types of things. So the women's suffrage movement was about people protesting and marching. There are iconic photos of folks coming down Pennsylvania Avenue, and 100 women were assaulted in one of the marches in the early 1900s. But they said, I'm still going to keep going. And, you know, even though women still don't have full equality, there have been some changes that have happened. And that's because folks were willing to put their bodies on the line and their time on the line to actually march. Civil rights movement, same thing. We've seen the iconic photos, you know, and I'm thankful to, you know, my elders and others who were willing to sacrifice, you know, so that I'd have a better life, if you will. So all that, brother, I'm saying is coming into the moment that we're in, where folks are understanding that, yes, we need to march. We need to keep a spotlight on what's going on, but we also have to understand policy. We also have to understand how we leverage resources to make change happen. Because here's real talk, y'all. Systemic racism has been around since a long, long, long time. We can debate how long it's actually been around, you know, and the reality is that it has been built into a system, whether folks want to be, you know, want to acknowledge that or not. We have the ability to address that and figure out how do we, you know, evolve a system into one that is actually truly representative of people and values people, and that can make change happen. And that's going to take everybody, right? Because I'm very real about that. And the African-American brothers and sisters who are online, and Latinx brothers and sisters, indigenous brothers and sisters will understand what I'm about to say. Black folks, indigenous folks, Latinx folks, they can continue and will continue to push and try and make change happen. It is up to white brothers and sisters to also be authentic allies in that space, because you can have conversations. You will have access to places and spaces that others may not, you know, and it takes everybody coming together to actually make that change happen. And that's why it's so important. When you see this exciting moment that we find ourselves in, when you look at the protests that are going on, You see white brothers and sisters who are out there, Black brothers and sisters, Latinx, Indigenous. You see LGBTQ brothers and sisters and others who are part of that process. So that is the cultural shift that is happening. So brother, going back to your question, and I told you sometimes my parents and grandparents get in my ear and they're like, you got to tell them all the things that they need to know instead of being as concise as necessary. That it takes this cultural shift that is happening. That's what scares some folks right now, to be quite honest with folks, is that they see this cultural shift. But that cultural shift can be a positive one where we address, some of the sins of the past and not bring them forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Dr. Louis Rivers. He is a professor at the NC State University, Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources.
Thank you for a great talk. And I just like to say you've been an inspiration for a lot of us in the academy, especially for a lot of us who are, thinking about environmental justice. And so just thank you for all your work, because I'm sure you know it, but a lot of people keep doing what we're doing because of the stuff you did and knowing all the mess you've had to go through in the different places you've been to. And touching on the messes that you've had to go through, can you talk to us a little bit about the state of environmental justice at the EPA? And just, I think sometimes people, can you just talk to us why the EPA is important and why we should be concerned, or if we should be concerned? And again, just thank you for all your work.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. It is the next generation and the generation who's just getting started that keep me going, along with all the elders who continue to embrace me and make sure that I don't step out of line. I promised that I would not get political on this call, so I'm going to do my best to not get anybody in trouble, but I'm going to do my best also just to tell it like it is, respectfully. So, it's amazing. And that's why I love science, I love the law, and I love facts. And that's why I anchor folks in the beginning with that 100,000 people are dying from air pollution. That's the conservative number, y'all. It's actually higher than that, and it has been ticking up. So if we know that, right, and if we say that we are people of faith, or that we are people who honor humanity, or any of the other labels that actually make you a decent human being, you can use whatever adjectives that you need to make that happen. How is it that you could possibly, knowing that there are still people dying, then you say, well, you know what? I'm going to roll back the Clean Power Plan, or I'm going to get rid of the Clean Power Plan, which is going to push more pollution into the air. I'm going to take it and get rid of the Clean Car Rule, which would give you more money in your pocket, but at the same time, stop all that pollution coming out of them tailpipes or coming out of, diesel trucks, which we know is having a significant impact in the warming up of our planet and all these lives that are prematurely being lost. So when you ask me the question about what's going on at EPA, there are incredible folks who are doing their best. Those career employees who have spent decades in trying to strengthen these laws because they see the gaps, right? No law is perfect. I've never seen a perfect law. And what we should always be doing is taking and evaluating and saying, how can we help to protect more people's lives? How can we help to get them the financial security that they need? All the things that are just basic amenities and as my grandmama would say, just common sense stuff. So you got a set of folks who are making some decisions that are contrary to the family values that they say that they believe in. All I'm saying is let's do an evaluation of, if you say that you care about people and you're trying to protect lives, is there just a certain amount of lives that you're trying to protect? I hope the answer to that is no. But when you're doing things that weaken stuff that mean more people are going to die, that more people are going to get sick, it makes it really tough to be able to wrap your mind around how you can justify that. I often say, and it gets me in interesting situations, that there is culpability for the lives that are being lost. For me, and I'm sorry, y'all, I just believe in real talk, there is culpability in the lives that are being lost from COVID-19. When you know something is that dangerous and you don't do everything in your ability to protect people, there's culpability. when you know folks are dying from their exposures to toxic pollution and you're not doing everything that you can to minimize that. People understand that if you are trying to do the right thing, and that if it still isn't completely protected, but you're moving in that direction, people will say, well, I understand that. You're moving in the right direction. So with all that being said, you know, the folks that are at EPA running it have been doing a disservice to the American people. The folks at HUD are doing a disservice to the American people. And I can go through the facts if anybody wants them. The folks at transportation are doing a disservice. The folks at the Department of Justice, which I love to have a conversation about because I work with a whole bunch of the good folks who were there. There is a disservice that is going on there. The question is, and the beauty of our democracy is that people get a chance to choose if you're okay with what's going on. If you're okay with people dying, if you're okay with people getting sick, you get to vote to support that. And if you don't like that, you get to vote too. And again, I'm not telling anybody who to vote for, but your vote has power. And you have to decide how you're going to use it. My grandma would say, you're going to use it for good or you're going to use it for evil. So again, I'm not going to evaluate that. Every person, when they lay down at night before you close your eyes, you know if you've done everything in your ability to actually help folks to be in a better place, or if you still got some work to do. Y'all never gonna invite me to come speak again.
Oh, yes, we will. I love it. Thank you. Next up is Dr. Reverend Portia Rochelle. She is the Social Action Chair at Raleigh Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, and she is the immediate past president of the Raleigh Apex NAACP. Are you there, Portia? You're muted.
You're on mute.
You're muted.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to all the sponsors, and thank you for Dr. Ali for coming. Bishop Laney can probably attest that I'm a person that causes trouble, but it's good trouble.
There it is.
And you were talking about the policy. So my question is that I received from a few NAACP members is, are you aware of bills that harm environmental justices that we should be aware of? And if so, how do we disrupt businesses and governments from placing harmful waste in areas closest to the low wealth area? A few years back, we had to deal with the hog farms. And we have people in legislature that were pushing bills to support hog farms in their districts.
Well, you know, well, first of all, thank you, NAACP family, for that question. I am a lifetime member, and Jackie Patterson is an incredible environmental justice leader who is there in the NAACP and been training the chapters around the country on environmental justice and climate justice. I mean, we just have to continue to stay in the fight. We have to, again, that's why our vote is so critical on that local and county level, because they're the ones that are making some decisions about where CAFO, certified animal feeding operations, hog farms, turkey farms, chicken farms are located. And they sometimes will do some of the zoning stuff so they can put it in Black and brown and lower wealth white communities. So we have to, at that local and county level, begin to change what's happening in that space. And that's why we got to make sure that we get folks elected, you know, who are willing to make the changes. And we also have to bring new economic opportunities into areas, because folks will get you with the okie doke. And the okie doke is this, because I've seen it play out time and time and time again. And they will tell you, well, there are going to be a certain set of jobs that are going to be attached to this set of stuff that's going on. And the reality of the situation is that it very rarely plays out that way. And if it's such a good opportunity, here's the question. Why is it that Black and brown and indigenous and lower wealth white communities are where we always place that stuff? If it's really great stuff, then everybody should want it. Now, of course, we know nobody wants to live next to this. Nobody wants to live next to a spray field. I took Cory Booker down in North Carolina. We was out on the Eastern Shore. And it was the first time he ever experienced, Senator Booker. It was the first time that he had ever seen a CAFO. And we were there, and they messed up because the winds changed, right? And anybody who's been around CAFOs know that the wafting of the stuff, I'm gonna keep it clean, can sometimes go and land on people's porches. People can't even put their clothes out on the line like they used to, because then it gets stained, you know, from the waste that's in the air. So Senator Booker was there with me, and he was like, what in the world is going on here? So he got firsthand to be able to see, you know, how this stuff moved. He also got a chance to see the lagoons. Why is the lagoon conversation important? Well, one, it's all that waste coming together, but two, because of these incredible amounts of rain events that are happening in these floods, then you have the breaching that happens. And then it gets into our water. So for all those folks who only care about the fish and some of the other aquatic life, then of course we know that it can end up dying. Then we also know Listeria and other things come from these algae blooms that also come from, you know, this waste that's going, not just the fertilizer, but also some of the other impacts. So Sister Portia, all that to be said is, one is the education, but the second part of it is our vote, our vote, our vote. And that's how we start to make change happen. And of course, a new set of economic opportunities so folks understand that they have choices. And again, every community has the right to choose whatever they see fit. If you truly work on environmental justice issues, you understand the phrase that we use, the communities speak for themselves. So if a community says, well, that's what I want, that's one thing. But most communities, when they understand the public health impacts, the how wealth is extracted from our communities, right? I want y'all, just give me 1 second, y'all, and then we'll move on to the next question. I want you to just use your common sense. If you build a house and someone puts a certified animal feeding operation next to it, or somebody puts one of these other toxic facilities next to it, do you think the value of your house is going to go up? And here's the dynamic in our country, that most people develop generational wealth by passing their homes down from one generation to the next. So you are extracting wealth from the communities who least can afford for, you know, the value of their most precious resources, besides their children and their family and their community, to go away. So there are all these impacts that happen. And that's why in the education that I and others do, we help people to understand the totality of the situation. And I apologize, y'all. I forgot in my presentation to actually talk to you about how communities are actually transforming their communities. Just give me a couple seconds, because I just want to call some things out for y'all. You can do your own research. I want you to look at the Regenesis Project, which is right down the road in South Carolina. The Regenesis Inc. project. It's important because they took a $20,000 grant and have leveraged almost $300 million in changes. Community labeled as the other side of the tracks, as many of our communities often are. Holistic set of challenges, an even bigger set of opportunities. Look at the work of Miss Margaret May in the Ivanhoe community in Kansas City, because I like giving people different types of places across the country to see how change is happening. Got rid of crack houses, got new green space in, got new housing in, new sets of jobs, all these things that are important. Look at the work of Diane Takvorian and Carolina Martinez over in the Environmental Health Coalition in San Diego. Not the pretty part of San Diego that's on the postcards, in National City. If you want faith-based examples, because many folks come from a faith-based background, look at the work of Reverend Buster Soares in Jersey City. Or look at the work that's happening by Reverend Floyd Flake up in Jamaica, Queens. Or look at the work of New Bethel in Chicago. So you got faith-based examples and you have secular examples, even though those secular examples, of course, are also, you know, there's the intersection with many of the folks who come from a faith-based background of how people, everyday folks who look like folks on this screen, are making change happen. How they're leveraging resources, how they're understanding how the power of their vote also plays a role in that, and how they are reclaiming power. So I apologize, because I normally would go deeper into all those examples, and you know, folks know how they can get hold of me and we can have a separate conversation on how we revitalize vulnerable communities.
Thank you. And this is the last question that we have set up ahead of time. And after this, we will just go to the questions that are in the chat feed. we will let Tara Moore do her magic, as she has to get us here to take us towards the end. Okay, so last question comes from Reverend Jamond Taylor, who is the rector at St. Ambrose Episcopal Church in Raleigh.
Good evening and salam. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for your inspiring words. My church is in a sacrifice zone, to use your phrasing, called Rochester Heights, designated by Raleigh during segregation as a Black neighborhood 1 mile from Raleigh's downtown. Government dumped raw sewage for 133 years there until June of this year, and then dumping Black people, zoning it in 1957. My church is in the floodplain in the Walnut Creek wet. 7/10 of a mile upstream is a new proposed development called Downtown South. It is 145 acres, 33 million square feet of new development space, 6 million more square feet than existing downtown building space. It will cause 6.8 million gallons per day increase of wastewater. The zoning goes before the city's planning committee 13 hours from now, 9 a.m. tomorrow. When it rains, we see the floodwaters of white supremacy flowing over this levee of injustice. Dr. Ali, what can our community do about environmental racism so that we can flow with rapper Kendrick Lamar, who said, "It's gonna be all right"?
Well, that situation you described, it's not going to be all right, but I appreciate the hip hop reference. You know, there's a couple of things. You know, one, we got to make sure that, as you already know, and folks are already mobilizing folks to be there and to engage in that process. Two, you know, we keep talking about voting, but three, which is super important, and this is a part of that accountability process. And I have shared this with a set of folks. If there is a new administration, that we have to do a set of projects around the country that are specifically focused on the area that you talked about. You know, I have shared with folks that we need to do 100 projects around the country where we are looking at the antiquated infrastructure that's been in place and bringing in a new set of infrastructure that is healthy and sustainable and that is addressing folks. The second part of that is also, as this rebuilding is happening, that we make sure that local residents have the training who are interested to play a significant role, to make sure that our contracting and subcontracting opportunities that are part of that are going back to these communities who have had to carry the burden, you know, to make sure that we are also building what I call these, how do I explain it? Because some folks will say mom and pop businesses. That's what we're talking about. You know, we are talking about these incubators of change, if you will, in creating these sets of businesses. So that is a part of this process. You know, when you're tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you know, the best that we can do is make sure that our voices are there, that we're holding people accountable, and that we're letting folks know that 9 million people have voted so far, but there are hundreds of millions of people who have the opportunity to vote, you know, over the next set of days, and that these actions, you know, will have ramifications. So if you want our support, treat us like you want our support. And if you don't, go ahead and we'll make sure that we reciprocate that as we vote. I can't get any realer than that, but it is in the moment, but it is also us thinking about, and I'd love to have a conversation with you offline about what is the plan, right? What is it that we are asking for? What does that look like? Who are the partners that are important? What's the initial set of investments and resources to get things going? And what in totality does it look like on the back end? And all those things are critically important as we try and mobilize folks, because we can't, and I know you are not doing this, but I've often seen some folks have a wish, right? Or, you know, this theory about what they want it to look like without anchoring people in the reality of what can actually happen. And that's why, you know, I shared just a few of those examples, because we can anchor folks into what real change looks like, when they can see themselves reflected in that change, because they see somebody who looks like Mrs. Johnson or Mrs. Ramirez or Mr. O'Leary, then they're much more likely to get engaged and hang in there in the tough times, along with you know, the good times. People love to be around when the party is happening or when the cameras are there. You know, the tough stuff is when that ain't going on and you hit a bump in the road. But if you got that plan, then people will stick around because they understand what step 1, step 2, step 3 is and how they plug into it. And that's for a whole nother seminar on how to build power.
Well, thank you so much. And let's go ahead and continue with some of the questions that are on the chat. Tara?
Great, thank you. And thank you so much for this wonderful chat. I've been really thinking that this was going to be so amazing, and it's just been wonderful tonight to hear from everyone. So we do have a few questions in the chat. We have just about 10 minutes or so left, so we'll try to get to a few questions in here. We have a question from Dargan Gilmore, and it looks like he did have to sign off, but it's a good question, so I'll read it anyway. Can you speak to racial equality, environmental racism, specifically around our brothers and sisters with disabilities? Looks like.
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. You know, we put the ADA Act in place, you know, to begin to address, you know, many of these disparities that existed for our brothers and sisters, you know, who, whatever that set of challenges are or capabilities that they were dealing with. And when you look at the impacts that are happening, both on the environmental side and the climate side, you know, when we talk about folks being hit first and worst, we know many in this community are just carrying an even additional burden. Think about, you know, when the historic floods came through North Carolina and South Carolina. And if you are, you know, in a wheelchair or you have problems walking or whatever the situation might be, it's extremely difficult to be able to get away. You know, if you are someone who is dealing with these additional impacts that are happening from whether it's air or water pollution, at a time when you are trying to strengthen your body, it makes it, you know, super difficult. So no matter what these situations are that we, you know, who have not had these challenges are dealing with, and it makes it really hard for us to get through it, imagine how much more for brothers and sisters, you know, who have these additional set of challenges are going on. So there is a direct correlation. There is a set of work that is specifically focused on whether you say the capable community or those who are dealing with a disability, depending on which framework that you operate from, that are laser focused on how do we shore up the gaps that exist for folks. I hope that helps a little bit.
That was definitely wonderful. Thank you. We have some good conversation from Ralph and Farah. I don't think we had a question in here. Mahamadou, I think your question is answered, correct?
No, that was just in case if we have already asked a question.
Perfect.
So
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. If there's time, this is the second question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. You can actually ask your second question if you'd like now before I get to the next one, since we do have a few minutes.
Well, real quick, thank you, everybody. Well, you talked about the agencies, and we know that the Energy Department played a significant role in the growth of the solar industry and the revival of the electric vehicle. And while we understand, like you explained, still many folks are still marginalized in these processes and policies. Are you hearing anything in the you know, the EPA or within the Energy Department as it relates to a recycling infrastructure? As you know, 91% of this plastic is not being recycled. I mean, are you hearing anything, any trends moving in the right direction when it comes to plastic pollution and the infrastructure to recycle?
More on the outside and more in the states than on the federal level, but that will change. And there will be some fights because folks know that, you know, petrochemicals play a big role in pollutions. And, you know, we need to call that out. So when folks are moving away from fossil fuels, you are also going to address many of the plastic related issues, especially single-use plastics. And, you know, folks are moving forward with addressing some of those issues. And just let me call out the fact also, when we're talking about environmental justice, there are 17 agencies and departments that have a distinct responsibility for environmental justice through Executive Order 12898 that President Clinton signed. At that time, there were 7, then it evolved into 11, and now there are 17. And there will be even more if there is a new administration And to go to the energy related issues that were just sort of highlighted, you also are going to have probably 3 or 4 new laws that will come out that will be in that space. There are 20 right now pieces of legislation on Capitol Hill that are focusing on environmental justice or have a strong, strong component of it built inside. And then on the states, people are starting to do some really interesting work because you cannot win on climate change if you don't win on environmental justice.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. And I know my computer's going to die, but I just need to say this also. So we're also talking about energy democracy issues, right? Which is super critically important. You got all these dynamics that are going on. Right now, there's a big fight in Detroit and a number of other cities across the country about folks not necessarily trusting the water quality. Prices for water have gone astronomical in so many different communities. Infrastructure is a part of that conversation as well, about rebuilding the infrastructure, and especially in those communities who have been, unseen and unheard for so many years. But there's also a strong set of work that's happening around, electricity and, people's electricity getting cut off in a COVID-19 moment, or even beyond or before a COVID-19 moment, that so many things are tied to that. So there's a set of work that is happening around stuff I call basic amenities, around water and around electricity and some of these other basics that whomever the next administration is going to have to get right, because you're going to have all these challenges and all these pressures that are going to be happening. And we can get it right. We can build the grid, but we can make sure there's actually real equity and justice that's built into that, so that we don't take an old fossil fuel paradigm. Hear me now, taking an old fossil fuel paradigm, putting it over in a green space and saying, okay, well, now everything is all right. Well, no, everything's not all right unless those who have not had ownership, if those who haven't had a voice in the design of policy are not a driver in that space.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from Miss Rosa Saavedra. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask your question to Dr. Ali on the call.
Okay. Let's see if I can. Hi. So my question is, I like what you were saying about how we need to get involved, engaged in more like, voting and how to go beyond that. So I know since you operate kind of all over the place, I'm just wondering, have you seen, or is there something brewing that really amounts to kind of a collective political education network that can build community capacity to analyze, understand, and challenge the policies that don't serve our community? And then even go beyond that. I mean, that would just be the beginning, but then if that can lead to actually policies originating from communities that are impacted. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. No, there's a number of folks who are doing it. I mean, the NAACP, who's right underneath of you in the block of folks, is doing it. La Raza is also doing it. I mean, there's a list of folks who are actually very focused on building local education and power. You can have the moderators reach out to me. I'll get you a list of some of the folks that are doing that. There's an incredible organization right there in North Carolina, both the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, but also Omega Wilson and Brenda Wilson, who are there in Mebane, North Carolina, with WERA, have also been very focused on helping people to understand, the power that they have and how it translates through policy. So there's a whole lot of folks who are right there in your neck of the woods who can help, along with many of these other organizations that have different things that are happening across the country.
Great, thank you. Chris Canfield, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, you may do that. Okay, I will ask his question for him. Do you see an increasing real appetite for change in the traditional white conservation community compared to your long history trying to promote that with no doubt lots of frustration?
Yeah, well, there's been some frustration, but that's all right, because the folks who are dealing with these issues, they don't get to step away, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, they're dealing with it. So for myself and others, we just got to stay in it. There is change that's happening. There is an evolution that's happening. I'd like to think the evolution is happening because it is the right thing to do. And there has been this road to Damascus moment where people were enlightened. But the reality also, I think, is that folks understand that their connectedness to what's happening from climate, from the climate emergency that we find ourselves in. And that for those who ignored what was happening in Black and brown and lower wealth white communities and all the citing of all this pollution, you know, that it is now playing a role in everybody's lives. And then you have the just and equitable platform where you have a number of these big green organizations and frontline communities have come together to say, you know, when it comes to policy, these are the steps that we're going to follow together in allyship. When it comes to resources, the resources can't go all over to these sets of actors. They've got to also be, you know, a equitable percentage that is coming to frontline communities. And there are folks who are backing that up from the foundations who also have responsibility in this space because they funded bad behavior in the past and did not get those resources in some instances to the frontline community. So there is an evolution that is happening. And I'm real honest also. I think George Floyd and some of these other things also, for whatever reason, woke some folks up and made them take some responsibility. So there is an evolution. So whatever it is that is bringing people to that evolution, that's fantastic. The question is it window dressing, or are you serious about being an ally? Are you serious about, you know, balancing out power and power redistribution, if you will? Are you serious about, you know, where the money is going and all these different types of things? So all that to say, on the happy note, because folks need to be able to see that light at the end of the tunnel, that there is a positive evolution that is happening. And I would be remiss if I didn't say young people are also playing a driving role in that, and saying that racism, sexism, ageism, all these isms that parents and grandparents and others, you know, were raised with and trapped by sometimes, that is not going to be a part of this paradigm that, you know, this next generation is going to operate from. So the great thing is there's an evolution, and it's being driven by numbers of different folks and entities in making that happen.
Thank you. Wonderful. Sue Scope from Every Tray Counts has a question about schools. If you'd like to unmute your line, Sue.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sue Scope. I'm with a group called Every Tray Counts in North Carolina. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how we can integrate the environmental justice issues in public schools, like the placement of landfills, the harm of plastics that mostly low-income kids are basically eating because the trays are made of plastic, the benefits of diverting food waste to compost facilities. And it just seems like we should take this opportunity to teach our kids about the environmental justice issues that impact them every day. And how do we take a group like ours that is in the public school lunchroom, or pre-COVID anyway, and integrate it into the broader environmental justice groups and issues that deal with other issues?
Yeah. No, thank you.
Have you seen that?
Yes. Oh, no, I get it. And you have a person after my heart. So I'm gonna do my best to answer that because I know my computer's about to die. So there are a number of different ways that we approach that. The first one is through the Department of Education. And if we have the right administration, making sure that we begin to build that there, and those dollars that then go to the states and then go to the local municipalities, that there is an attachment there, that we begin to do that. We also begin to bring in those who have been focusing on food justice issues and food insecurity issues, and the curricula and sets of successful applications that they've been doing. You know, we bring that in with them as well. And then if it gets really good to you, you also make sure that the Department of Agriculture and EPA, which also have their own educational components, are also working effectively, both on that federal level and, you know, on the state and local level, to also bring in those resources and accountability mechanisms to make sure that it actually happens. Those are just a couple of the ways, and I'm trying to talk really quick because I see my little light keeps getting smaller and smaller.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We do have one more question. If your laptop doesn't die, if it's about to die, then I can always send this over to you. But Pat Kelly, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Okay, well, I will actually then just send this question your way through an email since your computer is probably on its last leg right now. But thank you so much for everyone who has joined us tonight. All of the partners, obviously our NCWF team, ICCT, Orange County Chatham. Thank you so much, everyone, and our wonderful speaker. I know that you have a very busy schedule with a ton of different programs and talks on TV, and just the fact that you were able to make it here to speak to us really means a lot. So thank you, Dr. Ali.
Well,
We appreciate it.
Thank you all. You have
Thank
no
you.
idea how much I appreciate you and the work that all of you are doing. You know, I just hope that we can get other folks across America to look at this screen and see all these different types of faces coming together, because that's one of the ways that will make real change actually happen. So thank you all for your advocacy and the work that you continue to do. And just know we can make change happen. You know, we just got to make it a priority. And then we just got to do the hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone so much. All right, and everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Salam.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Mustafa.